What's up, y'all? I'm Thomas. Welcome to the pod. I'm here with Jared Johnson, and I'll go ahead and let Jared introduce himself.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. So I'm Jared. I'm a board member and founder at Abundant Housing Massachusetts, our statewide housing pro-housing group. And I'm also a board member and former executive director of Transit Matters, which is a transit advocacy group, works across Greater Boston. And in my day job now, I'm the Boston office director and a planner at Tool Design Group, which is a planning, engineering, urban design, landscape architecture firm that really specializes in building walkable places and sustainable urban design.
Sweet, yeah. So we met at Yimby Town a few years back in my current hometown of Austin, Texas, and I was recently in New England for the first time. Tried to connect with you there. We were busy. It was very I was just in Boston for 2 or 3 days between going to Portland, Maine, and Burlington, and New Hampshire. I did the New England Super Tour. I guess I only missed going to Connecticut and Rhode Island, which I'm headed back to. At some point, I'm going to go eat pizza in New Haven. Me and my friend have committed ourselves to it. But let me just jump right into it with a very blunt question. What are the biggest challenges you think that are facing the Boston Metro from an urbanist YIMBY perspective?
Yeah, housing, right? This is not a unique problem, but what is unique is in Massachusetts, there's not really a county structure. There's some nuance to that. There's courts and sheriffs, and out west the county has a bit more of a say, but by and large we don't have counties, and even the counties that do have some more level of control, they don't control land use. So land use is set in 351 different towns, and there is, I think, in many of those communities, the way that planning and housing is thought about is just not grounded in reality. It's just not grounded in Massachusetts, being one of the states at the bottom of housing production, per capita. And I think, something that is a strength in some contexts, the small, New England town and walkability and that sort of connection to government that comes with town meaning, can be a hindrance in really trying to think about, does that model of small town and does that does that form of government, does that work in a does that work in a major metropolitan area? Boston obviously has a leg up on a lot of other places in having America's first subway and having a for U.S. standards a reasonably large and reasonably good public transportation system, but it's not where it needs to be for a metro of this size, both in terms of the reach. If you kind of leave the core area, the kind of our version of the beltway, the inner beltway is Route 128. Once you leave that boundary, and really once you even get close to it, in most contexts, your transportation options really just absolutely plummet. And even within the core, there are some pretty big gaps, both in terms of communities of color and low-income communities that are underinvested in and don't have good transportation options, but also, so much of the growth in the Boston core has happened in former industrial areas, and there are some places where that has happened to be near a rail line. Assembly Square, Assembly Row is a good example of that in Somerville, where the developer added an infill Orange Line station, but there are so many others that are not really near rail, or they're near commuter rail, and our commuter rail is slowly moving towards more of a regional rail, closer to rapid transit kind of style, but it's still a ways off from that.
Yeah, I have some thoughts as a Boston beginner, a neophyte. I rode the Green Line extension to I think it was in Somerville. I don't know if
Yeah.
it's Union Hill Station,
Union
Union
Square.
Park,
Yep.
Union Square,
Union Square. Yep.
and
That's my neighborhood. That's my Green Line stop.
oh, right. Okay. So, yeah, I got off there. I went to like the little Revolutionary War memorial thing on the hill
Prospect
there.
Hill. Yeah.
Yeah, really beautiful. I liked it, but I also noticed I was in another town at that point. I was at Somerville, right, not Boston.
Yes. Yeah.
And I guess that's what you were talking about, where there's all these little towns.
Yeah.
It's not just Boston. Like here in Austin, we're this giant sprawling
Sure.
city limits, right? And
I think Austin is about 4 or 5 times the size of Boston land size wise.
that is wild, yeah. And so I'm guessing that it is a challenge to. I wonder, like, even just building like the Green Line extension or just building rail. Negotiating with like where does the rail stop go in your little town. It's probably difficult, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's very difficult, and something that also happens is there's also it sadly does enable a lot of finger pointing and like, well, yeah, we can build housing, but because the suburb next to me isn't building housing, we're never going to solve the problem, and it's unfair to sort of ask us to to build more, even if that is the community where there's a lot of demand, and that's not letting some of the wealthier suburbs that are close into the city and don't zone for housing. It's not letting them off the hook, but yeah, there's a incredible amount of sort of fractionalism, because of just how many communities they are, and then again, it'd be one thing if you had all these communities, but land use and certain policies were decided at a more regional level, but you have you don't have that.
Yeah, I wonder how it affects funding as well. I mean, we're very early in our light rail project here in Austin, and it's like I think it's literally just property tax amongst the entities that are kind of participating in it, which I believe is only Austin. So I don't like how does that work in Boston? Is it just like property tax funding rail, as far as you know?
Funding transportation or funding
Yeah.
cities? Yeah, so funding transportation. So, Boston and the MBTA is blessed in certain ways in that the MBTA gets a lot more state funding, right? I mean, I know in Texas, I think the Texas transit agencies get virtually no funding, or maybe no funding from the state, other than maybe some capital grants here and there. But a lot of the operating funding comes from the state, both just line item as well as a statewide sales tax, and then cobbled together from a bunch of other sources. And the cities and towns do put some money in, but it is on the slimmer side. Boston, for example, the biggest city, they paid $80 million is their MBTA assessment. The MBTA's
Wow.
operating budget is around $3 billion.
Wow,
So-
and $3 billion annual.
It's
So
a pretty small sum. But yes, but in Boston in particular, I think 72% of Boston's budget comes from property tax.
yeah, I definitely felt the age of the system. Like it was very like, in a way, very like cute, and like I was like, whoa, this place feels like I'm in a piece of history when I was in the subway. But I'm sure that even the short time that I was there, I think there was like some weird pause. I don't know, like some train in front of me stopped. And we had to wait for it. Like there was just stuff going on, and I was reading about how there, like, I think a week before I had arrived, people had to be maybe evacuated out of the system and like climb out. So I imagine like the system is showing its age. Is there a need for like to rebuild parts of it, or like how is that going?
Yeah, no, it's so that was a whole saga. So I mean, really, and if I can do a little history, lesson, you go back to the highway era. Boston's one of the few cities that really stops a major highway loop and branches and all of that. And afterwards, they're sitting there with the money, and Governor Dukakis, is successfully lobbies the feds to allow the state to use that money for public transit. And so we rebuilt the orange line, extended the red line out to Cambridge and on the other ends. I mean, and really built a great system. Yes, old, but a lot of money was spent into modernizing the system in the really, the 70s, the 80s, and the early 90s. Then you have let's cut taxes kind of mindset that comes into play in the 90s, and just slowly over time the T just loses all of that, or loses so much of that. The staffing, the maintenance know-how, and then it's just constantly starved, and they're constantly pulling from the operating budget to fund capital, and vice versa, and so then you get to a point where the system is just, I think 3 or 4 years ago the system was just in awful shape. I mean, slow zones, everywhere, people having to jump off of a bridge because a train caught on fire. There's even today they're still sort of working through the old rolling stock. We have some trains that saw the first moon landing. That's how old they are. So over the last couple of years, there's been a new general manager who's really rolled up his sleeves, and we've had to spend a lot of money and had to have a lot of system shutdowns to bring the system back into a better state of good repair. But I think there's still somewhere around, this is a rough guess, but $3 or $4 billion of repair backlogs that still needs to happen. So yeah, it has been it's been an interesting few years.
Wow. So, okay, I'm gonna throw some kind of greater Boston, a question at you, which is, was the big dig worth it in your mind?
Yes. Yeah. No. Absolutely. It's interesting. The background of my computer that I'm staring at is a picture of the Greenway, the Rose Kennedy Greenway, which is the linear park that sits on top of the Central Artery. No, I mean, of course it was. I mean, the downtown is far more livable. Has it solved traffic? No, but I mean, I think traffic would have been just, absolutely, catastrophic had they not done this. I think there were a lot of mistakes and missed opportunities along the way. One of them, we didn't have value capture. So take down this freeway, and the property owners, around there have benefited, from the project very, very handsomely. They've seen the value of their buildings go up exponentially. So billions and billions of dollars of increased property value, and there really is not. We didn't have the value capture. We didn't have a means to claw back some of that property value increase that only came from a lot of public money, and so that's a huge part of it. And really, when we talk about the cost of it, it costs $30 billion. Well, half of that is the interest, is the debt service. So if we had value capture and we had other mechanisms, if it had been told, it's possible that cost would have been dramatically lower. I think there were originally the artery was supposed to have a train going through the middle that would connect North and South Station. Reagan, famously hated public transit, and so he insisted that had to be dropped from the project if it was going to go forward. So that there were some transit improvements, but not nearly as many. Sorry, and the big dig helped to open up a new neighborhood. Downtown Boston is pretty dense. There's still some areas for for densification and for new stuff and new activity, but it's pretty tight. And so the Big Dig opened up this former Docklands area that is now our sort of secondary downtown, and it. But the problem is that they had too many exits. I think from that, part of it, as much as it increased the access to it, there wasn't adequate transit access to it, and then B, I think there were too many highway ramps there, and so because of the especially the line of thinking of that time, those highway ramps meant, oh, there's going to be this much traffic volume, which means the streets need to be this wide, and so you have a lot of really wasted space in highway infrastructure in that new neighborhood, and then you have streets that are far too wide, and even today it's still known as an area that is can be pretty traffic clogged. But yes, overall, the Big Dig was absolutely worth it. We just should have had a better way to recoup the costs. We should have made transit a bigger part of it, and I think we should have really thought about it as not as an opportunity to add more and more highway ramps and to funnel more and more cars into the downtown streets.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, as somebody who's into this stuff, I'm always biased towards, let's do the big urbanist project. But I do, something you do run into consistently, and which I do think there is at least some merit, even if it's not always in good faith, is this idea that how much does this cost? Is it too expensive?
Yeah.
Stuff like that. So I'm always just interested. This was $16 billion or so dollars, $24 billion with interest included, maybe more like $15 billion, but very expensive, right?
Yeah.
And so I do wonder, when is it too much? Like, would 30 billion and 45 billion with interest been too much? Like, I don't know.
It's an interesting sort of an interesting corollary to that is, I think. The thing about the Big Dig that I think is the most tragic is that it did scare people off from big ideas. There's really been a specter of the Big Dig sort of hanging over any, if a highway interchange project out in the suburbs goes a little bit over budget, this is a new Big Dig. And so, I think part of how we do more of these big mega projects is we talk about the value and we talk about the benefit more. And I don't think there's been enough talk about just how much value was created because of the Big Dig. That as expensive as it was, it has produced economic value many times that. And another example of this is London's Crossrail project was way over budget, like $5 or $6 billion over budget, 3 or 4 years late. One of the stations didn't even open with the entire line. It opened about 10 months later. Nobody cares about that now. I think 1 in 8 journeys in the entire United Kingdom is on that line. And so I do think some of it is, yes, we should figure out how do we lower costs. I'm really, I've been following, Ezra Klein and Thompson's work on abundance, and even before that, there are some folks that I know in New York and in Germany, Alon and Eric, that have done the Transit Cost Project. And so, yes, I think their ideas are worthwhile, and we should be trying to make these projects less expensive. But we also need to realize that, when you do transportation infrastructure that is serving places this populous and this dense, it's going to have a good economic impact almost no matter what.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Is there anything you find unique about New England when it comes to urbanism? And I mean, I guess the obvious answers are, these old New England towns, like it's resulted, I guess, in some of that fractionalization. There's obviously like a unique architecture in New England. Is there anything else worth mentioning about New England urbanism? In your mind, at least.
I mean, I guess we talked about it, but I guess, but if we can, flip it on its head, yes, the small town, um, the small townness of New England, in some ways can have some negative consequences, but it also is, when we talk about sprawl repair and we talk about, how do we, how do we have better transportation options and how do we, sort of fix the problem of the suburbs, where I'm originally from in Oklahoma, that is and out west, that's just such a tall order. There's just so much sprawl and there's just so much, unwalkability. And here, not only do you have the small towns that have these walkable cores, but you also have a pretty, there's a lot of protected land. And so, it really kind of condenses people into these corridors. And of course, there's sprawl and there's, not walkable places here. But I think the job of that sprawl repair is so much easier here because of the compactness of the communities here. And that, if we're able, and even in some of these small towns that are close to the Boston core and really should be building more housing, once we're able to turn that lever and build more housing and densify some of these, beautiful historic, New England town centers, it's really going to work out well because so many of them have, a commuter rail station right in the town center or right outside of it, and so you can have this growth happen without, a huge increase in traffic. You've got communities where, if you just raise the bus frequency a little bit more, you can really, have a lot of have good ridership increases and really, increase people's access because, most folks are, pretty in a short walking distance from that main arterial. So, I think there's definitely benefits to the small New England town, style of development.
The bones are good.
Absolutely.
I stopped in Portsmouth on the way back.
Yeah, beautiful town.
Yeah, and then I was reading a bit about it, and I'm usually very wary of what do you call it, sort of like historic preservation stuff. But my understanding is that town really would have only survived as it is because of private money, basically like bankrolling Strawberry Bank, kind of staying as it is. It's like this historic town where it's very very colonial vibe and with really beautiful flower gardens and just very picturesque, like feeling like I was stepping into colonial America for a second. And I guess my takeaway was, growing up in suburban Houston, the default is suburban sprawl, obviously, in much of America. And there's this almost like assumed idea that the default American dream or vernacular is sprawl. And it's like, no, if you go back to the beginning, by default, people were, living closer together often, unless you were on a big, plantation or I guess really rich people maybe had big properties or farmers and stuff, but not everybody was living in that environment.
The average worker, actually, they lived walking distance from their job. When the first trolleys came, the trolleys were too expensive for your factory worker. So people really lived pretty, close in.
Yeah. By the way, your hat says Greenwood Rising. Is Greenwood a neighborhood in Boston?
No, Greenwood is. Do you know about Black Wall Street in Tulsa?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So Greenwood is that neighborhood. So there's been a really great thing happening in the last few years of some great redevelopment in that neighborhood, and Greenwood Rising is the name of the museum and experience that talks about the race massacre and all the other associated history since then.
Would it have been called Greenwood at the time, 100 years ago?
Yeah, Greenwood was the official name. Yeah, Greenwood was
Gotcha.
the official name. Black Wall Street was the was the nickname. But yeah, Greenwood is actually the name of the main street that goes through it. If you know music, the Gap Band is from
Okay.
Tulsa, and Gap is Greenwood, Archer, and Pine. Those are the streets they grew up on.
Oh, okay. Very cool. That's cool. This is kind of a more of a general politics question, but I know Michelle Wu is running against somebody. I'm not really familiar with Massachusetts or Boston politics. Is that a real threat? Like, could she actually lose in your mind, or?
I think it is extremely, extremely unlikely. I think this person is running, in an environment where, rich guy, who is not a, a rich guy who's not a J.B. Pritzker is going to have a really hard time running in this environment, and you've got a incredibly skilled, you have an incredibly skilled politician, right? I mean, the fact that she was able to go to D.C. and really, hold her own against those Republican senators, and you've got she's been a very shrewd, political operator, her time in the council, and then also just, good mayor, not that every, mayoralty is perfect, but she's done a great job. Boston's one of the safest cities in the country. I think people are generally happy with the direction the city's going in, and the opponent has just not been able to have good answers for how he would do things differently. I think he's tried to sort of drive a wedge on some urbanism issues like housing production, which the city could do better on, but it's not clear that he has a great plan for that. And then he's tried to sort of agitate on bike lanes and bus lanes, but I just don't think those are issues that are going to drive people to the polls. So I think very unlikely.
The evil bike lanes. Boston does have something that I really love, which is, as somebody who loves urbanism and dense cities and walkable cities, and also Asian food, there is an urban Chinatown, right?
Oh, yeah. We've got
which is great.
Chinatown.
Yeah, I had some great food there. Man, I wish I could remember the name. I think it might just be called like Hunan Cuisine or something like that, but it was extremely good.
I think I might know the place you're talking about. But yeah, no, we've got a great Chinatown. And a very interesting project that is happening is with some of the Reconnecting Communities grant money. They're doing some planning around having a freeway cap park to kind of to reconnect Chinatown, because we do have a great strong Chinatown that has some amazing restaurants, but it has been it has been cut in half by a lot of transportation infrastructure, highway interchanges, the medical center just gobbled up so much of Chinatown. So it's hopefully that project can help to to mend some of that and just really knit back the community.
Yeah, I don't know if it was just a coincidence or something, but like we were there twice, and I saw, I believe, some people doing some like car culture stuff outside, some like showing off their, like, I don't even know what car it was, like some racing stuff going on, revving of engines. It seemed like a very narrow, like uncomfortable place to have a car, so I'm not sure I completely understood what was going on, but yeah.
Well, some of this is the sort of greater Boston diaspora that as much as our Chinatown is still a thriving Chinatown, a sizable number of Chinese American folks, especially folks who've been here many generations, actually live in Quincy or live in Malden, and those are two communities that not only have sort of second, third, many generation Chinese Americans, but also increasingly a number of like Chinese and Asian immigrants are going directly to those Chinatowns. So sometimes there is that tension of like a neighborhood that you would think wouldn't be wouldn't have some of the same tensions around street space reallocation. It does, because there are a lot of folks who own a business there, but live in other parts of the region.
Yeah, I think I went to a combination Nepali pizza place in Malden or somewhere around there. So shout out to that place. It was actually extremely good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jared. No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was like, Malden is so interesting. For those who don't have the geography, Malden is a couple of towns north of Boston, and and again we talked about in the beginning, like saying a couple of towns, it's 4 or 5 subway stops from the downtown core. But when you get there, it's a lot of single family homes and kind of very almost kind of small towny to have a subway and be so close to the city. But it is. I think I was reading that there are somewhere between like 80 to 100 languages spoken in Malden public schools.
That's crazy.
So, I mean, it's yeah. Well, I mean, and being in Austin, to a lesser extent Austin, but certainly in Houston, you definitely understand that a lot of people, when they think of suburbs, they think of, oh, that's just lily white, but that's not the case. There's so much the diversification happening in the suburbs, and it's not the same context that we've had in the past.
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion about Fresno and Dallas being majority Indian at this point. A lot of frankly racist discussion, but not that I love Fresno. It is just a big suburb, like the most suburban of suburbs, but that's most of Dallas. So appreciate your time. Shout out to the let people know where they can maybe follow you or anything else you want to shout out.
Sure, yeah. At JARJOH on I'm still gonna call it Twitter. On Twitter and Transit Matters and Abundant Housing Massachusetts on all the different platforms. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, man.
Of course.